It's been a few decades since games have been blurring the line between film and actual games. Narrative-driven games have long become an alternative medium of storytelling. Games like Bioshock, Mafia 2, any Telltale game, Uncharted or Red Redemption have become the staples of interactive storytelling, with a game like the first Bioshock defining these kinds of narrative experiences as an art form. Games like the Uncharted series or the Mafia trilogy feeling like literal films with compelling character drama, layered narratives, and well-directed cinematics. But let me expand on this cinematic part. Let me talk to you about cinematography. To the casual viewer, or in this case player, cinematography is the last thing they would think about. But if you pay attention to the different types of camera techniques used and look out for different attempts at visual storytelling, that kind of viewer can be rewarded with some genuine eye candy. But what is cinematography? To put it simply, it's the art of photography in the form of a motion picture. It's the way a film is shot. What defines cinematography is lighting, camera angles, camera movement, use of colors, and composition. To many, good cinematography is when the visuals set a mood, show off the setting, and/or tell a story. Now, what happens when you apply all that into a video game? Well, you get this.
We can make this right.
I feel like cinematography is very overlooked in games, but when they're fully utilized, you get some of the most gorgeous and well-directed cutscenes that gaming can offer. Cinematography is the real tool to showing off how games as a medium are very much interactive films. In today's video, I'll be looking at a few games and analyzing the techniques and keys to their great cinematography. There are some games that didn't quite make it into the script, such as Red Dead Redemption 2 and God of War, and I'm kind of sorry for that. But these games are the ones that really blew me away and kind of inspired me to make this video. Now, I'm not an expert at cinematography or filmmaking in general, but from what I've studied, I think I can more or less get the bigger picture of the art of cinematography. So let's lay back, chill out, and get the vibes rolling as I take a look at the implementation of cinematography in video games. Let's begin with a slightly controversial one, DMC Devil May Cry. This game may have gathered some controversy around its announcement and initial release due to an unlikable reimagining of an iconic and beloved character, some questionable writing, and a story that didn't quite land. But I'm gonna go ahead and say that DMC Devil May Cry has some of the best cinematography in the series, competing against the likes of Devil May Cry 3. While Devil May Cry 3 occasionally uses the technique of visual storytelling in colors and camera angles, DMC Devil May Cry does a similar thing but also shows off the beauty of the corrupted and demonic setting its narrative takes place in. Like with playing the game recently, I realized that I never really gave the game props for its cinematics because of how played they are by some sloppy writing. But when you pay attention to what you actually see and how it's presented, you start to look at things a bit differently. DMC likes to show off these wide shots where there's something bigger or grander not too far off in the distance, but in the center of the shot. Sometimes the game flips this around where something smaller is at the center of a wide shot. The good cinematography of the game is partly due to the overall environmental design. DMC has some stunning environments, and this is best shown during the segment where you get a new ability freeing this rich looking statue from its chains. The architecture and colors, along with good lighting and good camera angles, make DMC a very stunning game. During dramatic character moments, the game does follow more regular cinematic techniques that you see in other games and films. Close up and mildly shaky shots. But I have to tip my hat off to this level. Starting off with entering Limbo in this chapter, the use of different colors and the contrast from grey and unsaturated to turquoise and slight blues filled with moderate saturation, along with great camera work filled with shaky swerves and a distant shot, make this a very well shot sequence. It gets even better later in this chapter when you start working with a character named Phineas. The scenes where Dante and Phineas interact and walk with each other, although not special in technique, are fun to watch because of the lighting and these simpler angles. But there's a very brief moment in this chapter that provides probably my favorite shot in the game. It's where you're tasked to find Phineas's eye and you're by the nest of these flying demons. This scene has Dante in the lower center and on the side some environmental dialogue. This was the shot that made me want to put DMC in this video. Lastly, I want to talk about the second last cutscene of the game, where Dante, Kat and Virgil look out into the distance before getting into drama. It's mainly the lighting and some mild angles that makes the cinematography aspect of this scene great. When Dante walks back and his face is heavily shaded by the sunlight behind him, when the trio stand beside each other, when Dante and Virgil stand face to face. It's not an outstanding scene like those that come before it, but it still does a decent job in showing off the game's camera work, and it is fairly impressive. Ghost of Tsushima was easily the best looking game of 2020. Compared to previous games in Sucker Punch's history, Ghost of Tsushima adopts a completely different technique of filming its cutscenes. It's one of the few games that I've played and seen where there's a lot more steady shots overall. Sucker Punch abandons their cinematic techniques from Infamous 2 and Second Son in favor of something that feels a lot more minimalistic, spacious, professional. If you've watched and paid attention to the cinematography of Better Call Saul and or Mr. Robot, Ghost of Tsushima looks like home. It reminds me of a beautiful indie film, like if the cinematographer behind Nightcrawler was called into the studio to do some work on the game. I'm not kidding when I say that Ghost of Tsushima probably has the best cinematography I've seen from a game, alongside Journey. It's genuinely art. It's kind of surreal how well this game's cutscenes were directed and shot. It also comes to show that Sucker Punch have pretty much mastered the ability to tell stories. From the deep and complex superpowered anti-hero stories of Infamous and Infamous 2 to a story of a man with the capabilities of being a ninja and samurai. Yeah, Sucker Punch really stepped it up big time in this game. I'm a big fan of wide and spacious shots taking place in nature. Ghost of Tsushima absolutely nails this. The cinematic achievements of this game are pure eye candy. They're luscious, vibrant, beautiful, artistic, and just mouth-watering. Like, shout out to cinematographer Ira Owens, camera designer Josh Harrison, the world designers and the art directors of this game, and shout out to Nate Fox. I'm a big fan. I want to analyze this game's wide shots. Now, the technique of wide and spacious shots can be used as a form of visual storytelling, showing off the setting and story world, creating distance between characters, or just to make a scene look good. I think that Ghost of Tsushima uses all of these to an extent. These shots convey how small Jin is compared to the much bigger world of Tsushima. During the duels, these shots show just how distant these skilled individuals are from each other, but also how close they are to meeting their fate. Possibly a long shot, I know. They obviously show off the beauty of this open world, with its tall grass, stellar lighting, and luscious nature. At times I feel that certain cutscenes utilize this technique just to look more cinematic. I want to briefly touch on the lighting and the use of cinematic borders. In films and games, lighting can make or break a scene. Either the scene is too dark to the point that you're struggling to make out what the hell you're supposed to be seeing, or it's a little too exposed and bright where it's a bit harsh on the eyes. Ghost strikes a pinpoint perfect middle ground. The rays of light, brightness of the day, and darkness of the night are balanced to perfection. Cinematic borders in action films are usually implemented for the purpose of keeping the viewer's focus on the action. There's a bit more to it than that, but Ghost of Tsushima nails it nonetheless. This is easily one of the best looking games on this list. Next is the first Assassin's Creed. Easily one of the most underrated and least talked about game in the series, and is still one of my top 5 favorite Assassin's Creed games of all time. I was looking at some gameplay footage of this game, rewatching the narrative aspects, digging into some lore and such. I then realized how the game cleverly integrates a fixed but still interactive camera. This is something that never appeared in later games, which is a shame. It makes it feel as if the cutscenes and gameplay don't feel too separate. It makes these cutscenes feel like a film set, like you are the cinematographer. Because while it is a fixed camera, meaning you can't really orbit around your character, you can still switch and pick angles. I absolutely adore this because not only are the devs controlling what you see, but they provide different preset angles to what you're supposed to be seeing, allowing you to cycle through 3 to 4 different wide shot angles. The cinematics don't separate the gameplay because while you're watching these cinematic moments, you can still move your character around as well as switch angles. And if you can't move during the cinematics, you can still manipulate the camera to an extent. The game makes sure you're always in control, but I'll dig deeper into gameplay cinematography in a bit. But for a 2007 game, Assassin's Creed's visual language and cinematic work still holds up pretty well. I'd even say the game is ahead of its time in this regard, but honestly that whole game was kind of ahead of its time. But I've never really played a game made in the 2000s and earlier that uses the techniques that Assassin's Creed uses to craft its cinematography. Spacious angles, steady wide shots, like really wide shots, and obviously an interactive camera. But if you minus the fixed and interactive camera, keep the spacious shots, and make the very wide shots have a sense of speed and feel a little shakier, you'll get a little game called Shadow of the Colossus. I'm gonna briefly touch on Shadow of the Colossus since I haven't played too much of it. I want to mention this game because I want to talk about its composition and just the overall concept. Composition is an element of cinematography. It roughly means how the on-screen elements are arranged and how they appear and set the stage. How what is arranged in the frame sets the image of a scene. Now what would I mean when I say that the way composition is done in Shadow of the Colossus makes everything look big, huge, grand? What I would mean is that the way the game composes and arranges what's on screen and how it frames it makes things within line of sight look bigger, much more open than they actually are. The game takes advantage of its very open spaces and composes these shots that create a sense of speed and make you feel like an ant to the world. The game uses composition to depict just how small you are compared to these big creatures that you need to take down, and just how big they are compared to the vastly open and large environment that they mind their own business through. Honestly, the way this game is framed and shot makes it that almost any screenshot of this game can be made and framed like a beautiful artwork on someone's wall. While on the topic of Shadow of the Colossus and hanging a literal frame of a beautiful screenshot on somebody's wall, I want to mention how the HUD of a game can affect the cinematography. I'm a dude who prefers and admires the style and art of minimalism. It's clean and simple, so I love it when a game is designed to not require much of an HUD so it can feel more immersive and cinematic. Answer me this, would you prefer your HUD looking like Far Cry 6 or Just Cause 3, Borderlands 2 or Ratchet & Clank, the Uncharted trilogy or Spec Ops: The Line? Actually, they're quite similar. A cleaner and less cluttered HUD can make quite a difference on the way a game looks, plays, and feels. A cleaner HUD can make things feel a lot more cinematic. Sometimes no HUD can make things feel unsettling, anticipating something surprising, suspense. but a minimal HUD can also feel a bit freeing and show a game's true beauty, immersing yourself in the world and story that you're interacting with. Hence one of the reasons why games like the Uncharted series, Spec Ops The Line, Max Payne 3, and The Order 1886 are considered some of the most cinematic games in the industry. Journey is a great looking indie game. Actually, no it's not. Journey is a beautiful and artistic looking game in general. It's like DMC Devil May Cry in some regards because it's a game where the visual elements go hand in hand with the cinematography. In this case, the art direction, lighting, and environmental design. The camera work is actually somewhat unique here. It's a player-controlled camera that switches into different angles without many cuts. Also, the smoothness of the camera movement feeds into the free-flowing theme. But there's just moments in this game that are just absolutely breathtaking. Like if you had to show this game at an artistic showcase, it wouldn't even feel out of place that a game is being shown at an art showcase. I mean, damn, just look at this. The intensely warm colors and lighting alongside the camera angle is just absolutely perfect. It's amazing. This is the definition of games being an art form. I have no words that can truly describe the masterpiece within this game as a whole, let alone its cinematic and visual aspects. So here, have this scene. Now, cinematography isn't only exclusive to cutscenes or cinematics. In fact, it can very much be present during gameplay, like I roughly mentioned while looking at Assassin's Creed. The best way that cinematography can be implemented in gameplay is by having an always fixed and occasionally fixed or a player-controlled camera with good composition. Let's take one game per example. The first Devil May Cry, Uncharted 2, and I don't know, Battlefield 3. Devil May Cry adopts the classic fixed camera of all the Resident Evil games. But instead of a fixed camera that's only steady every angle, in Devil May Cry the camera can follow the avatar. But the fixed camera is used to allow the devs to control what the player sees at all times. With Uncharted 2, normal gameplay allows the camera to be in full control of the player, where players can choose where to look and orbit around their character. The only moments when these controls are taken away from you are when the player is in the middle of a set piece or when the game shows off a grand spectacle. This is done to have the player feel fully in control during the regular gameplay, but take away that control during core cinematic moments. Battlefield 3, being a first-person shooter, only has you look through a first-person perspective during gameplay or real-time in-engine cutscenes. It's a fully player-controlled camera where composition plays a huge role. The weapon of choice will always be on the right-hand side, and you can't really have a fixed camera during gameplay. With Devil May Cry, you are merely the actor. The devs are the cinematographers, providing you with cinematic shots that you have no manipulation over whatsoever. With Uncharted 2, you are the actor and the cinematographer, until something really crazy or flashy happens where the devs will snatch the camera away from you and say, I think you should focus on the acting and stick to the script, then you can man the camera again. With Battlefield 3, the camera is in your eyes, your point of view. You can look wherever you want to, whenever you want to. It's your eyes after all. But there's flaws with each one of these methods. The first 4 Devil May Cry games are plagued by the problems of a fixed camera. It's what makes the platforming segments of those games unbearable. The camera is placed or angled in a way where a platform can look further or closer than it actually is. Sometimes you can't even see which platform you're supposed to jump to because it's just out of frame or the camera only follows the avatar's movements. The occasionally fixed camera shares some of these same problems, but to a lesser and infrequent extent. A player-controlled camera can have FOV issues, which can make things look off or cause headaches and motion sickness. Things can look too close or a bit too wide. But nothing is perfect after all. Games can pretty much be referred to as playable cinematography. You interact and have a lot of control over the visuals most of the time. but that also comes to show just how far games have come. These used to be simple 2D games that you would just play for the hell of it on your television. Now they're a medium of storytelling and an interactive cinematic experience. And if you look at games like Brothers in Arms, Hell's Highway, Yakuza 0, any Telltale game, the Mafia trilogy, and especially the Metal Gear series, they really take the statement of this game is like a movie, or it's like you're playing a movie, to the next level. Metal Gear Solid 4 has many long cutscenes. One of the final cutscenes is literally an hour or so long. The Mafia games have many cutscenes that are directed, well written, and shot almost like a movie. It's truly amazing. But I feel like cinematography needs more attention in the gaming industry. I find that there are many game cutscenes that are shot very similarly. But then you get the games that I've mentioned. These games show the pinnacle of cinematic and visual storytelling in the medium. And I feel like more devs and consumers should acknowledge that aspect more.